Okay, so the artwork that I'm going to be talking about now is Peter the Great's polyptych. This is the last in the trio of Catherine the Great's polyptych, Ivan the Terrible's, and now this is the last one I'm working on. It's unfinished. The name of it is Peter the Great's Grand Embassy Through Europe. Peter comforts the infant Stalin. This is only partly completed, as you can see, but the museum and I were interested in showing it, exhibiting it unfinished so that viewers could come in and see how I work step by step to create these very large pieces of art. So most of what people know about Peter the Great is that he loved sailing ships and he wanted his own warm water port that would enable trade from Russia to go all over the world. Initially, his port was only up here in the Arctic, on the Arctic Ocean. This was the only port that Russia had. And so getting out to the Arctic Ocean and getting all the way around here through the Arctic Ocean was pretty impossible for a big chunk of the year. In 1697 to 8, Peter made what's called his Grand Embassy Through Europe. And he was supposedly incognito, but he traveled with a big retinue and he was 6'8" tall, so he wasn't too incognito. So most famously, what Peter did while he was in Europe was he spent time on the shipbuilding docks of the Dutch East India Company, learning how to build ships. And he really built a ship, an entire ship. But he learned to build all of the parts of the ship. Now, this is a printout. Ordinarily, this would only be in my computer, but this is how I work. This is like my sketch. And this is how I always work in creating a large polyptych. I begin on the computer and work doing research and visual research and historical research for months before I ever start painting. I combine and recombine images and which are like placeholders for something that I'll eventually paint there. So as an example, here's a port city for Europe. I'm contrasting European ports with Port Peter's Arctic seaport. And I'm putting together here a historic picture of, this is probably Barcelona or one of the other well-known European ports. And this is a painting of a river from a painting. And this is an old picture of some ships that I may want to use for this. And so this is how I sort of collage together these things, which I will later paint. And again, I work on this sketch for months and it really takes a tremendous amount of time. This part of it is as important as the painting, the second part of it. So I began Peter's polyptych with the concept of playing a card game. And so here we see a European dressed in the clothing of that time and a Russian dressed in a big fur hat. And they're playing a card game, the geography card game. And here you see all these cards that the Europeans are getting. Peter is very mad and envious, and he's singing to the infant Stalin, who is smiling up at him. And he says that, darn, it's not fair because the Europeans, this Europe here that I'm playing with, he gets all the best cards geographically, and I have the lousy cards. So this first panel is he's singing about all the great advantages that Europe has in ports and being able to ship things. And then he sings in the second panel about all the bad cards that Russia has gotten. So you see, here's a 2 and a 2, and they're getting all lousy cards. This is the middle panel, which is will be the largest panel. And you can see here, larger, why Peter would have wanted to be able to have shipping ships and a warm water port because of all this phenomenal gold and riches that Europeans were getting out of the New World at this time. And here in the complete sketch, you see that all of this, the Spanish and the Dutch were able to sail easily, much more easily than poor Peter up here, out across the ocean to exploit the minds and the people of the Americas, to take all this gold. This was literally coming out of the America's mines and getting brought back to Europe, and then various European countries would mint those into coins and bring those down here around to this very rich, the Indian Ocean, where the Spice Islands were. At that time, a ship full of nutmeg was worth more than a ship full of gold. It's just astounding what spices were worth at that time. So all of these goods are going back to Europe, and you can see how Europe is really booming financially, and here's poor Peter stuck up there. This original map concept came from an anthropologist, Eric Ross, at the University of Morocco. And I've taken his wording in these which explain some of this, some of the map, and with his permission. But anyway, so I added all the images in the map, and these are sort of influenced by maps of that time in which people would draw pictures of what was going on in each country and put it into the continents of the map. Now, the poor infant Stalin here, he's hearing all Peter sing all this, and here he was originally smiling up at Stalin. In this panel, he's starting to get teary, and then in this one, he's fully crying, and actually we have him up there. He's really weeping, and he's turned now to the viewer to sort of appeal to the viewer. Hey, my godfather Peter isn't paying any attention to me. I'm getting so depressed and sad over the cards, this lousy card game, and please help me. So I'll talk a little bit about how I did this portrait. I wanted to have a baby that looked straight out at the viewer, and sort of appealed to the viewer, that could draw the viewer from across the room even into looking at this, what's going to be an extremely complex polyptych. And so I knew that I wanted a very particular facial expression on this baby. And I create banks of images. So I collected millions of images of babies. Most babies, when they cry, their eyes are all scrunched up like this. I wanted a baby who was really crying, but was looking straight out at you. And so here his eyes are open. He's looking at you, but he also has that. I want to talk a little bit about another stage that I go through as I'm creating all of this. And that is a stage where sometimes I do pre-paintings for the final polyptych. And in this case, I'm doing them because in order to fit, these images are painted larger here and then reduced digitally and then collaged here. And the reason I do that is that I can't paint as finely in this size, this smaller size, to fit into this map. I want to be able to paint in greater detail as I'm doing the painting, and then when it gets reduced, it still looks good. And here's another one. This is the Indian Ocean, and so that will get inserted over here in the final map. And here we have the Peter the Great's Arctic port, and yeah, okay, I guess this is going to be too complicated to get into, but anyway, that's another picture for Russia. I cater images with with the songs that each czar is singing, each godparent is singing. So here Peter is singing, darn those flush Europeans, they got dealt the best cards, closest routes to New World gold, from seaports in their front yards. So he sings along about each of these good cards that the Europeans are getting. And then I combine the images to work with those lyrics, that I write these lyrics myself to the tune of the folk song Kalika. So, I've talked a little bit about my image banks with this baby, but in general, I'm working from huge image banks. For example, I've collected images of many, many ships from this time period. And you need to have them facing the direction that you want for your painting. You want the angle to be from up above or beside or whatever. I have a sub-bank of different colors of sails, slightly different shades, ships, wood colors, and so on. And in fact, my son built me a supercomputer so that I could create this map, because it's 96 inches wide and I'm dealing with hundreds of layers of visual images. Each of these ingots of gold or silver that are coming from the New World are on a separate layer as I'm creating this. So I have almost 1,000 layers creating this, and I couldn't manage that in my older computer. So he built me I have an amazing computer now that I could never afford if I hadn't had a son who could build it for me. So I guess the other thing that I just wanted to say about these pre-paintings of the New World is that these really show the incredible exploitation of those indigenous populations all over the world into the Indian Ocean, slave trading from Africa, and so on. And so this is sort of the dark and ugly side that I'm balancing out in my paintings with having these comic characters. Oh, and another thing that I just wanted to say is that to paint these things, or any of these, I have hundreds of little people in my paintings, and I paint each of them as a separate individual portrait, with a lot of research that goes into the body movements and the facial expressions of each one. And I use acrylic paints and very tiny brushes, with just a few hairs in them, and often with a magnifying glass. So that's sort of the painting part of it after the. So anyway, I'll just say finally here that Peter does finally, in this middle panel, he is finally hearing that the infant Stalin is in distress. So he shifts around and starts saying that, wait a minute, Russia has got all the best cards. And so these next two panels are about Russia getting all the best cards. But I'm not going to tell you about them. You have to come to the museum and see that.